I didn't notice when he became part of my routine. At first, he was just another name in my day, another voice that filled the quiet spaces between my obligations and my excuses. But then I started waiting for those moments. I started arranging my time around them, like my life had slowly tilted in his direction without asking my permission. It was always small things. A message that came in later than it should have. A reply I typed, erased, and typed again because I wanted it to sound effortless when it wasn't. I told myself it was harmless, that people were allowed to connect, that I was just being friendly. But friendliness doesn't make your heart beat faster when your phone lights up in the dark. At home, everything felt predictable. Safe, familiar, almost soft in a way that had lost its edge. There was comfort in the quiet, in the shared routines, in knowing exactly how the night would end before it even began. But comfort can feel like being unseen when you've forgotten what it's like to be truly noticed. With him, I felt noticed. Every word I said seemed to land somewhere deep, like it mattered more than it should have. I remember the first time I realized I was hiding something. It wasn't a big lie. It was a pause, a hesitation before answering a simple question. I felt it in my chest, that tightness that comes when you know you're stepping over a line that doesn't have a sign posted, just a feeling that says you shouldn't go any further. And I went anyway. We started talking about things that didn't belong in casual conversations. Fears, regrets, the parts of ourselves we only admit to in the quiet moments when no one else is listening. He told me things he said he'd never told anyone. I told him things I didn't even realize I'd been holding inside. It felt like we were building a small world between us, one that existed in the space no one else could see. There were moments when I caught myself smiling at nothing. Moments when I replayed his words in my head, not because they were profound, but because they were his. I started comparing. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop. The way he listened, the way he remembered, the way he made silence feel full instead of empty. One night, I stood in the dark, the glow of my phone lighting up my hands, my heart pounding like I was doing something dangerous even though I was just reading a message. He asked me if I ever felt like I was living a life that didn't quite fit. I stared at the screen for a long time before I answered. Because the truth was, I did. And the scariest part was that I was starting to feel like he was the place where I fit instead. I told myself I was still in control. That I could stop anytime. That this was just an emotional detour, not a destination. But control is a lie you tell yourself when you're already losing it. I started looking for him in rooms he wasn't even in. I started hearing his voice in my head when I should have been listening to someone else. The guilt came in waves. Sometimes it hit me all at once, heavy and suffocating, usually when I saw the trust in my partner's eyes or felt the weight of a shared memory. Other times, it barely whispered, drowned out by the excitement of being wanted in a way that felt new and electric. I lived in that space between shame and longing, telling myself I'd choose the right thing tomorrow. He never pushed. That was what made it worse. He just stayed. He listened. He made room for me in his world, and I stepped into it without thinking about what I was leaving behind. The line between us blurred so slowly that by the time I realized how far I'd gone, I couldn't see where it had started. I remember thinking, for the first time, that if something happened, I wouldn't stop it. The thought scared me. It also thrilled me. That's when I knew this wasn't just a distraction anymore. It was a promise I hadn't spoken out loud, a door I'd already unlocked in my mind. And even then, even with my heart already leaning toward him, I still went home and pretended everything was the same. I sat in familiar rooms, touched familiar hands, and felt like I was carrying a secret that was getting heavier by the day. I told myself it was temporary, that this feeling would fade. But deep down, in the quiet place where honesty lives, I already knew. I wasn't waiting for it to end. I was waiting for it to become something I couldn't take back. The night everything changed didn't announce itself. There was no warning, no dramatic moment where the world seemed to hold its breath. It slipped in quietly, like it belonged there, like it had always been waiting for me to finally stop pretending I didn't want it. We were close enough to feel each other's presence without touching. That space between us felt charged, heavy with all the words we hadn't said in weeks of careful conversation and half confessions. My heart was loud in my ears, and for a second, I thought about stepping back, about breaking whatever invisible thread had been pulling me toward him. But instead, I leaned in. It wasn't just about what happened. It was about the moment before it happened. The moment when I realized I could still walk away, and I chose not to. That choice settled into me deeper than anything else, heavier than guilt, stronger than fear. I remember looking at him and seeing something I hadn't felt in a long time, recognition. Like he saw the version of me I'd hidden from everyone else, even myself. When I spoke, my voice didn't sound like my own. The words came out soft, almost fragile. I told him I didn't want this to stop. Not the closeness, not the way he made me feel like I wasn't invisible. I begged him, and the truth of that act hit me as soon as I did it. I wasn't just asking for a moment. I was asking for a connection I knew I couldn't carry back into my real life. After, I expected to feel ruined. I expected the kind of regret that makes you want to rewind time and pretend you were stronger than you were. But what I felt was something worse, something more dangerous. I felt calm, safe, like I'd finally stepped into a place I'd been circling for a long time without knowing how to enter. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was full. It held everything we both understood but didn't dare to say out loud. That this wasn't a mistake. That this wasn't going to be easy to forget. That something had shifted, and it wasn't going back. On my way home, the world felt different. The streets I'd walked 100 times looked unfamiliar, like I was seeing them through a version of myself I didn't recognize yet. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I almost dropped it. A message from him. Just a few words, nothing dramatic. But they landed in my chest like a promise. When I opened the door, everything was the same as it always was. The quiet, the familiar sounds, the life I was supposed to be living. I stepped into it like someone stepping into a role they'd forgotten how to play. Every smile felt rehearsed. Every word felt like it was covering something else up. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second. I told myself I would draw a line. That this would be the first and last time. That I would be strong enough to choose the life I had built instead of the feeling I had just discovered. But even as I made those promises to myself, my hand drifted toward my phone, and I knew they were already breaking. The messages became a lifeline. Short, quiet exchanges that felt louder than anything else in my day. He asked how I was, and I told him the truth in ways I never did with anyone else. He told me he missed me, and I felt it like a physical pull, like my body was learning a new direction to lean in. The guilt didn't disappear, it sharpened. It followed me into every conversation, every shared moment at home. I started noticing how easy it was to lie with a smile, how natural it felt to say I was tired when I was actually somewhere else in my head, with him, replaying the way he made me feel like I was more than just a part of someone else's life. There was a moment when I caught my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. I barely recognized the person looking back. Someone who wanted two lives at once. Someone who thought they could carry this secret without it spilling into everything else. I almost turned the phone off. Almost. Instead, I typed his name. That's when I understood what I'd really done. I hadn't just crossed a line. I'd built a bridge back to him, and every step I took away from him felt wrong, like I was walking in the opposite direction of where I actually wanted to be. I told myself I would fix this. I told myself I would choose the right thing. But every time his name appeared on my screen, my heart answered before my mind could stop it. And in that quiet, glowing space between my hands, I knew I wasn't just holding a secret anymore. I was holding the beginning of something I wasn't ready to lose, no matter what it cost. I started measuring my life in moments between messages. Everything else became background noise, something I moved through while waiting for the next vibration in my pocket, the next quiet reminder that he was still there, still thinking about me. It was a dangerous way to live, always half present, always leaning toward a world that existed on a screen and in my head. At home, I learned how to act normal. I perfected the art of being just distracted enough to seem tired instead of distant. I laughed at the right times. I nodded in the right places. I memorized the rhythm of our conversations so I could follow along without really being there. The scariest part was how easy it became. How quickly lying turned into a habit instead of a choice. With him, everything felt sharper, brighter, real in a way I hadn't felt in years. He didn't ask me how my day was just to fill the silence. He wanted to know what I thought, what I felt, what I was afraid of. And I gave him those things freely, even though they were supposed to belong to someone else. I told myself emotions didn't count the same way actions did. I told myself I wasn't hurting anyone if no one knew. But secrets have weight. I felt it in my chest when my phone buzzed at the wrong time. I felt it in the way my hands shook when I put the screen face down on the table. I felt it in the way I started to flinch at simple questions, like they were traps waiting to spring. Every day, the space between who I was and who I pretended to be grew wider. He started to want more. Not in a demanding way, not with pressure or ultimatums. Just in the way he talked about the future, about things we could do, places we could go. The way he said my name like it meant something beyond the moments we stole. It should have scared me. Instead, it made me feel chosen, like I wasn't just someone passing through his life. At the same time, the person at home started to feel like a stranger. Not because they changed, but because I did. The small gestures that used to mean everything began to feel hollow. The shared memories felt like they belonged to someone else, a version of me who hadn't learned how to want two lives at once. I hated myself for noticing the difference. I hated myself even more for preferring the new one. There were nights when I sat in the same room with my partner, both of us silent, both of us pretending the quiet was comfortable. My phone would be heavy in my pocket, like it was pulling me away from the moment I was supposed to be living. I would imagine his words before they even arrived, and when they finally did, my heart would leap like it had been waiting for permission. I started to feel exposed, even when I was alone. Like the truth was written somewhere on my face, in the way I moved, in the way I hesitated before answering simple questions. I caught my reflection in mirrors and windows and didn't trust what I saw. Was I someone who loved, or someone who just didn't know how to let go? The fear of being discovered crept into everything. Every unexpected sound made my chest tighten. Every glance felt like it lingered too long. I rehearsed explanations in my head for questions no one had asked yet. I imagined confrontations that left me speechless, standing in the middle of a life I had already started to dismantle without meaning to. He noticed the strain. He told me I looked tired. He told me I deserved to be happy, like it was a simple thing, like happiness didn't come with consequences. Sometimes I wanted to tell him everything, to lay out the mess of my life and ask him to help me choose. Other times, I wanted to disappear from his world entirely, to save him from becoming part of a story that was already hurting people. But I didn't do either. I stayed in the middle, balanced on a line that kept getting thinner. Every message pulled me closer to him. Every day at home pulled me further away from the person I was supposed to be. I told myself I could keep both, that I could manage this double life without it collapsing. It was another lie, and I knew it, even as I kept telling it. One night, he asked me a simple question. Not about where I was or what I was doing. About what I wanted. I stared at the words on my screen for a long time. Because the answer felt too big, too dangerous to put into something that could be read and reread and remembered. I wanted him. I wanted the life I had. I wanted the version of myself that didn't have to choose. I typed something safer instead. Something small. Something that didn't reveal how deep I was already in. He replied with understanding, with patience, with the kind of kindness that made the guilt burn hotter. Because it told me he was willing to wait, even if I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. That's when I realized I wasn't just afraid of being caught. I was afraid of what would happen if I wasn't. The pressure didn't come all at once. It built slowly, like a sound you don't notice until it's so loud you can't think over it. Every message from him carried a little more weight. Every moment at home felt a little more fragile. I could feel something breaking long before it actually did. He started asking questions that didn't have easy answers. Not about where I was, or who I was with, but about where this was going. About whether he was just a secret I kept in my pocket or someone I would eventually stand beside. I read his words over and over, my chest tight, because I knew I couldn't give him what he was really asking for without taking something away from someone else. At home, the air felt different too. The silences were no longer soft. They were sharp, full of things neither of us wanted to say. I noticed the way my partner watched me when they thought I wasn't looking, like they were trying to recognize someone they'd known for a long time and suddenly couldn't. That look stayed with me. It followed me into every conversation with him, into every moment where I tried to pretend I still had control. I told myself I would end it. Not because I stopped wanting him, but because I couldn't keep carrying the weight of two lives without one of them collapsing. I rehearsed the words in my head, again and again, trying to find a version of the truth that wouldn't sound like betrayal. But every time I opened my phone, every time I saw his name, my resolve softened. He didn't feel like a mistake. He felt like a choice I was too afraid to make. There was a moment when everything almost came out. A simple question, asked at the wrong time, with the wrong tone. I felt my heart jump into my throat, felt the room tilt as I searched for a lie that wouldn't sound like one. I answered. It worked. But the relief didn't last. It never did. It just left behind a deeper sense of how close I was to losing everything. He told me he couldn't keep living in the shadows. He said it gently, like he didn't want to push me, like he was giving me space to decide. But space can feel like a demand when you know time is running out. I could hear the edge in his voice, the part of him that was tired of being a secret. It hurt to know I was the reason he felt that way. That night, I sat alone with my phone in my hands, staring at a message I hadn't sent. It was the closest I'd come to the truth. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to change things. Enough to make a choice real instead of just something I thought about when I couldn't sleep. My fingers hovered over the screen, shaking, as I imagined what would happen if I pressed send. I thought about the life I had built. The shared memories, the quiet moments, the version of myself that existed before I learned how to want something else. I thought about him, about the way he made me feel seen, about the future he hinted at without ever saying it out loud. Both felt real, both felt like they belonged to me. And I knew, finally, that I couldn't keep pretending I deserved them both. The phone buzzed in my hands. A message from him. Just 3 words. Are you there? I felt something in me crack, not in a dramatic way, but in a tired, honest way. Like a wall I'd been leaning on for too long finally gave out. I typed. I erased. I typed again. Every version of the truth felt too big to fit into a screen. I wanted to explain myself, to make him understand how I got here, how I didn't mean for any of this to happen. But intent doesn't change impact. Wanting doesn't undo what's already been done. I put the phone down. I stood up. I walked through familiar rooms that suddenly felt like they were waiting for me to make a decision I'd been avoiding for too long. My heart was loud in my ears, my thoughts a blur of what-ifs and almosts. I realized I was standing at the edge of something that couldn't be undone, no matter which way I stepped. When I picked the phone back up, the screen was dark. No new messages, just my reflection staring back at me, tired and uncertain, caught between who I had been and who I was becoming. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything I hadn't said pressing down on my chest. Somewhere, someone was waiting for an answer. Somewhere else, someone trusted me without knowing what I'd been carrying. And there I was, in the middle of it all, holding a silence that felt louder than any confession. I never sent the message. Not that night. Instead, I sat there, listening to my own heartbeat, knowing that whatever I chose next would change more than just my own life. I had begged him to never stop. I had begged myself to hold on to something I wasn't ready to let go of. And now, standing on the edge of the truth, I finally understood that the hardest part wasn't choosing between them. It was choosing who I was willing to become when I did.